personal views and opinions expressed by our podcast guests are their own and are not legal advice or official statements by their organizations. Hello, my name is Debbie Reynolds. They call me the Data Diva, and this is the Data Diva Talks Privacy podcast, where we discuss data privacy issues with industry leaders around the world for information that businesses need to know now. Today I have a special guest. I always say that, but this is also true today. I have Demeka Fields here. She is Counsel, General Sports Marketing, Data Privacy at New Balance. Demeka, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here with the Data Diva herself. So thank you.
So I actually contacted you. Well, you and we met, right, several months ago, and we've done a couple of collaborations together. I have a shout out to Ironclad and Vera over there, who brought us together, right, to be able to do. We've done a couple of like ask the expert sessions about different data privacy laws. And I don't know why I sent you a message and I said, oh my God, I'm so upset at myself. I had never asked you to be on my podcast. I'm like, what was I thinking? Oh my God, Demeka, you totally have to be on here. So, so I'm glad you said yes. I'm happy to have you on the show.
No, thank you so much. When you messaged me, I was super excited. I'm like, what? I'm in the company of all these greats, literal greats that you have talked to. But I think from our first meeting with the panel, I'm like, okay, I can get with Debbie. And we always, start having our own conversation. We have to bring others into it because we connect so well. So no, I am super excited to be here and honored you asked me to join you.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, I just beat myself up. I'm like, what was I thinking? We have to be on the show. I love your role that you've done. Also, you were with the Minnesota Vikings at one point too. So I would love to talk about sort of your journey into privacy. So I think it's really interesting the way that sort of you've gone there. And then part of your role also is marketing and how that touches privacy.
Yeah. So, with the Vikings, when I first started with the sports team, did not think I would be working on any privacy matters, right? I'm thinking I'm going to be doing things working with the football team and different companies, but never that privacy aspect. But when you really start to dig down deep into a team, when you work for an NFL team or any team in any league, you're really a contract generalist. So you do the sexy contracts with, your coaches and the doctors, but then you do the not so sexy contracts, which is like trash removal. You're like, wait, what? Like, no, someone has to do that contract. It's you. And then, with data, I would say my last 2 years, I really started to dig down deep into the data privacy and the breaches aspect because we were explaining our platform at the Vikings online, and you really start to think of your worldwide fans, right? So outside of Minnesota and parts of Wisconsin and the Dakotas, we do this skull chant at the stadium. And so we have a lot of fans that are in like Iceland and Greenland and Europe. The NFL is growing, but then we had to start really thinking about GDPR and how does that touch us because we're not based, in the UK, but we want to reach those fans, and is it worth it, right? Then you start looking at the risk associated with it. Is it worth targeting those fans and really trying to get them involved? Or does that open us up to an entire can of worms that we don't need to open ourselves up to for 10,000 fans, when we can just focus on the fans in the States, and that's millions of people. So we really had to think about that. And the last 2 years, it just really opened my eyes to really look into, how does this impact our sports team, as well as also with your data breaches. I think that is something I left at the Vikings, and now I'm dealing with really, really closely with New Balance. It's just, if there is a breach, how do we deal with it? And dealing with third party companies, because we would have so many third parties, what what standard are we holding them to? What are we putting in their agreements? Are our agreements buttoned up? Because maybe we're not controlling the data, but if someone else is, people are going to look to the Vikings. No one else knows that smaller third party vendor. So are we protected if something happens? And are we making sure we're getting notified? So all of that stuff. So I started the experience with the Vikings, and then coming into New Balance, I would say a sports attorney through and through, whatever that means. But when they said, a portion of your job will be data privacy and handling corruption and data breaches, I'm like, okay, let's see, what that means. And I think I am still trying to figure out what that means, but it's totally different from the Vikings because, the Vikings, you're dealing with a national organization, international, of course, international reach, but you're really focused on your smaller area versus this is a global brand, right? There's New Balance UK, there's New Balance Italy, New Balance Australia. So New Balance is really a global brand. And so then, of course, there's a lot of different regulations that come into play when we're developing marketing campaigns, which is probably smarter for us to have our different entities all over the world versus just having one entity in the US and trying to have that reach. I think that would be tough. And then really dealing with ransomware attacks, like how do we deal with that? Do we have the proper protocols? And that's a little bit what I'm in right now. We're starting to figure that out. So I never thought I would see myself as a data expert, but now as I talk, I'm like, okay, maybe I know something. But it was never my goal to get into this industry. But I mean, now with the way the world is going, you have to, your company, maybe not you personally, but your company has to have some type of expertise or have an expert to know how you all should govern yourselves. And so that's where I am, just learning and growing, but it's really interesting and it's top of mind now. So it's been good so far.
Yeah. I heard someone say, I don't have the exact quote of who coined the phrase, but they said every company is a data company now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So regardless of whether the data is electronic or not, you're dealing with data of people. And then, you of course being very consumer facing, right? Human facing, people facing, you're doing campaigns or selling products all over the world. Your reach is so broad, right? In the types of things that you guys do. And I'm sure when you went to law school, you probably didn't think you would be dipping your toe into the data ball of wax.
No, I am still a bit surprised that I am even doing podcasts with you, right? I just never thought this would be my sector or, part of the sectors I'm in. And like I said, it's really, really interesting because it's so expansive, right? Like I'm dealing with the breaches, including the ransomware attacks and getting the protocols in place. And for a 200-person company, it's a little bit different from a 2,500-person company across the world. So no, I don't even know if we have the right classes to even touch this topic at Tulane or at any law school. I don't know how many law schools are really teaching this, but they could start for sure.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Yeah, sure. Yeah, it just touches, I don't know, I feel like technology as a whole hasn't had gotten the foothold in law school, so they should have, just in general. And then this whole data element is just crazy, right? Because these regulations are changing so much, and a lot of like what you're talking about when you're talking about having plans and protocols in place, that's really about the future, right? You're trying to prepare for the future. It's not about a precedent. It's not about something that happened in the past, right? But even though, like, if someone has a breach, obviously, that's something that would require like the typical, legal, judgment and redress and stuff like that. I think one of the really interesting things that's happening with privacy and data right now is that, you know, we're coming upon situations where there can be harms or harm that happens to people for which there is no adequate legal redress, right? So a lot of it, like you said, like having your contracts button up, knowing who your third parties are, getting an understanding about, what that handshake is like, what this is our responsibility, this is what your responsibility, and us together, this is how we're going to do this, right? So it's almost like you're baking a cake with someone and like you have the eggs and the milk and someone else has the butter, but just because you have those ingredients doesn't mean that you're going to make a good cake, right? You have to find a way to really collaborate and communicate together.
Yes, it takes so much effort. You have to make sure there's an actual agreement first, right? And there are times where you find out there was no agreement. And as a lawyer, I'm always like, there's never an issue until an issue, right? People in other departments are like, yeah, we don't need a contract. The contract's basic, it's fine, we can sign it, and then when there is a breach or something happens, then it's like, oh, wait, well, we didn't let you see this contract, or we didn't have a contract, but we never had a problem with them before. And so, of course, it's first having the paperwork, but then it takes some thought and planning, like you mentioned, to really make sure that just because we have the ingredients, like I have the eggs and the milk, and someone else has the flour and the yeast, what are the measurements, right? Like what, we can't just all put in what we think is going to be the right measurements and like, let's just see how it tastes at the end. It will not taste good. I can tell you that.
Right.
So, I was really thinking like, let's sit and plan this out and really think about it. And, sometimes just in our day to day, people get so rushed, right? Like there's always a rush. We just need to go, go, go. We need to hurry. We just need to make this happen. And most of the time that's just not the way to go, because we want to make sure, we need to know what information are you actually collecting and how do you store this information and what are you going to use it for. And one thing that's big with this on the sports side of things and teams is, you know, are you going to sell that information? And in what stance are you going to take as an organization that you're not going to sell, right, your fans' information? That's pretty big. And just making sure that people are aware of where their information is going to be used. And I remember you used this great analogy of making sure, like with the bank, making sure if you deposit money, you know where your money is going and where it's at. And when you want to go get it from a bank, you're able to. And I think that's kind of where we're going into that space now where, when someone has my data now, I'm actually like, well, wait, what are you using this for? And can I ask you to remove it? And so we really have to stop and think and spend time on these contracts. And that's one thing I'm always pushing. And so let's think about how we are drafting this and is it realistic? Because if we draft these 20-page documents, 30, 40 pages, and this section isn't realistic and something happens and we can't actually go by this, then what was the point? It makes no sense. So that's something that I'm big on in drafting, realistic plans. Let's make sure this makes sense, but we need the details.
Right. And I'm glad you mentioned kind of realistic plans. So, because there are so many privacy laws that have things in it about third party data sharing, I can see how some companies get, concerned about it, right? Because there is a risk there. So, it's not like you can say, oh, we're going to stop doing business with all third parties. Like that doesn't work, right? So, third parties have existed as long as business has existed in the world, right? So, that's not really realistic. But I think some companies may try to write in things in contracts that are very unrealistic for a third party. And one thing I tell companies is that you shouldn't ask someone to do something that you can't do. So, so if you're not willing to
Right.
go to the top of Mount Everest, you probably shouldn't ask somebody else to do the same thing.
Right. And because realistically, they can't. So why put in my drafting mind, I'm like, why ask them to go to Mount Everest and they don't work out. So, they might not even make it past the foot of the mountain. So it's like, let's start small or go to another vendor, right? Like if they don't have the protections we need, then we just need to go elsewhere to
Right.
someone that works out a little bit or is willing to do the training and really willing to invest the time versus, like you said, asking and telling someone they're going to climb Mount Everest. And we know that it's just not going to happen because we're setting all ourselves up for absolute.
Totally. Right. Exactly. Exactly. What is your thought about kind of digital transformation? So, when I say that, because of COVID, obviously companies when they want to do business, whether it's let's say you want to install an accounting software or bring on some new technology, like biometrics is the new hot thing right now, or things like even these vaccine passports and stuff like that. So we're getting into a situation where companies are, in order to stay in business, they have to get into these realms that they were never in before of collecting more data than they had before. And then you're bringing on these new tools. What is your thought process around, let's say someone's bringing in a tool that has like biometric data in it or whatever, you again, you're collecting data that you never had before about people, and obviously there's a concern about whether you should collect it or not, how it's getting stored and stuff like that. But I think one of the challenges that I'm seeing, because I work a lot with developers, is that a lot of times they obviously want to create tools that can be used by the broadest range of people possible, right? But not everything that they put in those tools should be used, right? Or is even legal in certain places. So, it's kind of incumbent upon the company to find a way to be able to really vet that, make sure, okay, well, can we turn this thing off? Or, what parts of this product am I going to use, and how are we going to be able to implement it within our organization in a safe way in terms of privacy?
Yeah, no, I think you have it completely right. One thing that, at least with my marketing group, that I'm always asking is, what's the full plan, right? Like you said, if a new tool is collecting some data, a lot of times we focus on what they can do for, how it can benefit our business, but do we know the complete, like, the robust nature of this tool and what it can actually do? Because that's where we also, like you said, want to protect ourselves and say, okay, we want to collect this data, but we don't want this data. And if they are going to collect this, like, how do they handle this, right? And what is their plan? And maybe they've been looking at one state, but if we have customers in the Californias or the Virginias or, abroad, is this going to work for those states? Because those states with the highest or the most regulations, that's what we really have to reach out for, right? We have to make sure we hit what they're asking us for. And so I'm always asking, I need all the detail, right? Like I need as much detail as possible. I don't need you to send me just what you think I may need or what you want me to see, because then I'm going to dig deeper and find out the information anyway. But like, let's look at this entire tool and look at all aspects of it and really decide, is this too much for us? Do we have to too much, regulation? Are they collecting too much and we don't even want to get in that space? We really like, maybe we don't need biometric data. We only need name, number, address for shipping. Do we need to even go with this company, right? And have that be a risk? Or if hackers are targeting this company because they have this data, that we don't need, we don't even want our customers to be, be in that line, right? Like, let's go somewhere that they just really have what we need and it's a little more just targeted for us. And so, that's what I feel like lawyers are always the bad guys, but it really is like, okay, we're going to filter this. You all send us all of your ideas. We know this is the new product that's going to take us from zero to hero. Like, there's always something. But when you send it to us, just know, okay, we're going to start talking about risk in these crazy scenarios where everyone's like, oh, lawyers are so dramatic, until that crazy scenario happens and we're in the news, like my beloved Howard University, which we may talk about, but it'll never be you until it's you. And then you're figuring out how to deal with it. So I'm all about knowing as much as possible and then figuring it out from there.
Yeah, I agree with that. And so the back end of digital transformation is kind of I call it almost digital degradation, right? So let's say you had a tool, it's old, doesn't work for what you want. It has all this data in it. What do you do? So in the past, it was like put it in the back room, put it on a server somewhere, don't delete it or whatever. And what we're seeing with a lot of these data privacy regulations, they're not making it easy. They're not saying delete it after 7 years. They're saying delete it after your business purpose has concluded. So, I mean, that's like a hard trigger to even think about, right? Because I think I spoke at a conference, General Counsel conference this week in Chicago. And one thing I told the lawyers that were there was that, software is created to remember and not to forget. Okay. So when you tell me, oh, we want to delete this and, forget that, it's like, this was not built that way. So you really have to really think it through in terms of your process and make sure that you have a tool that lets you do that. Because some tools won't let you, delete stuff or take stuff out or move stuff around. What are your thoughts about that kind of end of life, end of useful business cycle of data?
No, you hit it on the head. I feel like I have dealt with that a number of times where, we have someone in house at both my companies have this crazy idea and they want to collect all this data. And before it was, we're targeting for tickets and, come to the games. And here we're maybe targeting for footwear ads and different things. It's like, what do you need all of this information for, right? Like, what are you going to do with this information? Where is it going to be stored? Like, have we thought through this process? And before, I think it was just like, no, we'll use it. We're thinking about just using it for this one thing. It's like, okay, well, do you know where it's going to be stored, either internally or this third party? Like, what are our options here? And like you said, we've run into a couple companies that we've been using that they didn't have the protocols in place if we needed to destroy data or someone wanted to remove their information from the system. So it's like, hey, we're going to have to look at the companies we want to use in the future and make sure we they have this technology. But some of these companies that we're already using, we're going to have to pivot. Like, we're looking at when contract dates come up and when we can go somewhere else, because now like you said, you really have to know your purpose for storing this information. And for us, it's also making sure that we're only storing the information we need. Kind of like I said before, we don't need but we don't need their height, weight, skin color. I know like some of that we use it for football because you're trying to see who your fan is and everything. But do we really want to store that information? Because that just opens us up to have this PHI. So we just want to make sure we're storing what we really need, right? Is it just name? Is it phone number, name, and email address, right? Like, that's one of the simplest things. Do we need much more than that? And why? And I think that's what I have had to get into the habit of just asking why. Tell me why, so we can really think through this. And because this is not a catch-all anymore. Like, no, let's just get as much information as we need and we'll have it. And then if we need it, we can go to it. Like, that's not flying anymore. You need to only store this sensitive information that you need, and everything else don't even ask, because we don't even want it to come into our grasp. So then we're responsible for it. Like, in this case, which is never the bare minimum is what we want. But in this case, for data, other people's data, we want the bare minimum. Like, what do we need? If we don't need it, we don't want it. Like, don't bring it here.
Right. That's what I love that. Don't bring it. Don't bring it.
We don't want it.
Right. And then, I feel like, especially, a lot of lawyers, they don't like to get rid of things because they think, oh, we're going to need it for a case or whatever. It's like, no, you don't, especially like after a case is gone. It's been like, I've had so much trouble to get people to delete stuff. It's like, oh my God, it's over with, it's done, or actually had someone do a somersault when I showed a certificate of destruction. Like one thing that, a litigation did come up with something and they didn't have it because it got destroyed and they were happy. So you definitely want to be able to do that, right? You don't want to be like, oh my God, I got this document request or whatever. And we should have deleted this stuff, but we didn't, and it's still here. And then we, have a thing like, an example of that is like the T-Mobile data breach, where I think they're calling it unauthorized access now. I don't know, but they had data that was from people who were trying to get T-Mobile accounts, and literally it had like very little business use. The business purpose and the business use was really low, right? But it was like on some, again, let's put it in the back room. Let's put it somewhere, that doesn't have as much security. It's not as important or whatever. And now that's like a huge issue. So I try to tell people, some people say data is the new gold, and my European friends hate that term because they feel like data is very personal and you shouldn't make it about like money or monetary value. But not all data is good data, right? So some data is can give you high risk, right? So it's like low value and high risk when you keep the stuff that you don't need and you don't go back and do that. And that's kind of the work that's not as sexy, right? No one, it's like, I call it like the abandoned amusement park where nobody really wants to do this. No one wants to do it. No one wants to look at this, but it really is some of the highest risks that companies have.
Yeah, and that's what we've definitely, I think, in both situations at both companies, I've been part of creating the plan for how long the data retention, right? Like how long do we want to keep this data? And that's what we've had to tell people. I mean, I know lawyers, old school, keep everything, right? If you're dealing with coaches, people sometimes in a different generation, just like keep. We don't know what's going to happen, right? I might need this information from 25 years ago because they may call me. It's like, it's not going to happen, right? Like it's not going to happen. But we start to have to spread the message of the more you keep, the more successful we are to like risk, the more, if there's litigation or something like that, and you have emails from 25 years ago, they're going to be able to go back into your 25 years worth of emails, which I know is like a hot topic right now. But it's really just, we need to set how long we need to retain this information. If it's 5 years, everyone know it's 5 years. Like, let's set this plan in place. Because I know a lot of companies don't have that, right? So HR may be saving their information for 20 years, legal may be 25. Then some areas might be 3, and you're like, well, wait, we might need a little more than 3 years, but we don't need 20 years. So let's everyone get on the same page. And that's why these plans are so important. But you have to go further than just having a plan. Of course, you have to practice and all that, but you need to at least have thought about it, because to have a plan, for the most part, you've put some thought into how long we're going to retain this information, why, what are we going to retain, what are we going to let go. And so I think that is super important, and I don't think people realize how important it is.
Right. Again, it's kind of the unsexy topic that no one wants to talk about, because actually that's a cost, right? It's not really, this data isn't making you money anymore, probably. And it's just sort of, something, oh yeah, we had this and we want to delete it. And then a lot of times what happens in organizations, especially as the data gets older and older, the people who know about it leave the company, right? Either by choice or other means. And eventually there's like 1 or 2 people that know anything about this information. And then a lot of times people are, makes them more reluctant to delete it because they're like, oh my God, no one knows about this. I have a friend, my dear friend, Joy Heath Rush, and she made a great analogy. She was saying, some companies keep data almost like it's like a garbage dump, but they think a diamond ring is in it, so they want to keep it.
Actually, that's perfect, because it's exactly what it is. Like, there might be something in there, so let's just keep it just in case. Like, I'm cleaning out my closet to move eventually, and I just had to get over it. I'm like, okay, you're never going to wear this, right? Like, you never use this in the past 3 years. Let it go. And it's kind of like that with the data. Like, You haven't used it, you haven't looked at it, you're not thinking about it until you pull it out. You're like, man, this is cute. Well, let me just put it back. Like, no, like if you have to use it a certain amount of time, you need to depart. You need to let it go. And so that just reminds me of what you're talking about. It is like, oh, it's a diamond in the rough. Like, no, if you haven't looked at it, Joe who retired, he didn't look at it when he was here.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably okay to
To
go.
let it go. Absolutely. No, letting go. Letting go. That'll be the name of your book. Letting go. Letting go
Right?
of data. What issue or topic in sort of technology or data privacy is top of mind for you right now? Like, what are you thinking about kind of in the future that's, getting your attention?
Right now, it's actually really relevant because we're working on this at New Balance, but it's the ransomware attacks because we are so online now. I mean, as a lawyer, I used to print out everything. And of course, I would store things on my computer, but I would print it out. So if my computer went down, I probably have 10 contracts printed that I can like read and redline and whatever. But now with us being online so much, it's like, have we really thought through how this would work? And I brought up Howard before, but that attack, I mean, I think hybrid classes were shut down for 2 to 3 days. I mean, students couldn't go to regular class because they didn't have Wi-Fi. Like, it was a big deal. And it seemed like they had some plans in place, which is always great. But I don't know if they had actually worked through the plans to see what what was going to happen or how long it was going to take. I think Colonial Pipeline was the same thing, where I was reading they didn't even like, they paid for the ransom, and then it took so long for that information. They ended up using their backup, but then the backup took so long. So it's like, okay, we have all these systems in place, but do we know how to use them? And if something happens, how long are we going to be offline? Like, how is that going to happen now that we're all at home? Does anyone have paper copies of our 300-page booklet on how to deal with a ransomware attack? So we have ransomware attack. The ransomware, the outline is online. We can't look at the outline because it's online. So we don't know how to deal with the ransomware attack. So that's really where we are in dealing with it in this upcoming week of how does our plan actually work, right? The tabletop exercises of, okay, this happens. What are we going to do? Does it take 3 days for our backup server to get online? How are employees around the world going to deal with this? Do we have one server for everything? Where is it backed up? So that is not keeping me up at night. I think the next week it will, but that's top of mind for us because you're going through different stages of your company of let's see where we're at. Let's make sure we're prepared. We see it happen to another company, so you want to make sure you're prepared. And then once you start peeling back the layers, you're like, we're not as prepared as we thought we were, right? This is super outdated. We have people, they haven't been here in 3 years, right? Oh, who was supposed to update this? Oh, they left and they didn't update or they didn't send the latest version. So I think that's really where I am from a work standpoint of making sure and helping the company get to a place where we're comfortable and we're more confident in our breach manual and everyone's on the same page. And we've had management changes, right? So maybe the people, like you said, who knew everything, they're gone. So having a plan is always big for me. I always want to have a plan, but then like, let's see how that plan really works before it happens to us in real time. We're kind of struggling because we have a plan, but it's not in layman's terms. No one knows what this means, right? It's like, okay, let's make sure we have a plan and let's update it to make sure it states how we really want it to work. And we don't just have this chart in place and we don't know where the arrows point to, whatever. It's like, okay, let's go through this so we can see, this didn't really work. It looks good on paper, but how is it really going to work? And if it took 3 days to get our systems back, how do we reduce it? What steps do we have to take to get it to be a day or 3 hours, right? So that is where my focus has been in the data privacy realm. It's interesting. Super.
Yeah, yeah. I think the thing that has happened probably over the last 25 or 30 years is that people thought of technology as, let's say you're a lawyer, you do your job, and technology helps you do something faster, right? It helps you, leverage, do a lot of the heavy lifting, for you to help you like be more efficient, get more insights, whatever. But the thing that sort of has crept up over the years, and what a lot of people are starting to realize, especially with like ransomware, cybersecurity attacks, and stuff like that, is that most of us can't do our jobs now without technology. Like it's so much a foundation of what we're doing that we could literally not do our job. So thinking through those issues that you're talking about are of critical importance. And then also making sure that the people that you have supporting you, that they understand the importance and understand how important they are in this whole thing. So I think, especially I work a lot with general counsel, and I like general counsel folks in general because you guys are, so you're smart, you're lawyers, but then you also have to be a business person, right? You have to understand the business, and you have to understand how businesses work. You can't like throw a grenade and then leave the room, basically.
Right. And it seems like with anything like this, they come to the lawyers anyway, right? I think there's two of us, myself, and then our general counsel, who is part of this group. And the group is not huge, right? It's people from different departments, but it's not huge. But we probably have two people and everyone else has one, right? It's like everyone's going to come to the lawyers like, we know this is not legal, but we feel like you would know what to do, or we feel like we can use your mind and you can help us figure out what to do. So even when you wouldn't think legal is going to be involved, I remember looking at our manual for the first time, and I'm like, I don't know. Like, I do not know what we should do. And so, but talking it through and looking at our resources is like, okay, we understand and I understand that people are going to come to us to even just help sort it out and figure it out and get everything into place and get a plan. And it may not be a legal plan, right? Of course, we need to know who we're going to contact if there's a breach and what's the threshold, all those things. But it may not be an overall legal plan, but legal is going to be involved. And so, like you said, we got to know the business. We got to know our counterparts in different areas of the business. It's critical to make sure this plan goes down without a hitch. And I know we talked about in one of our panels, it's important to make sure everyone knows their part and that they are critical to this and they don't think it just falls on the data team or the security team or the legal team, but this is going to have to be a multi-person team from across the business is going to have to come together and make this work. So I think that is super key.
Yeah, I agree. So if it was a world according to Demeka and we did everything you said, what would be your wish for privacy anywhere in the world, whether it's technology, law, anything, human stuff, consumer stuff?
I wish if there was a perfect world, as someone who is, I feel like newer to this world than other people, I would want more information available in layman's terms. I think I'm reading some of this information online, and even though, I'm a lawyer and I've taken the bar, I've taken multiple bars and I've done all this work, I'm reading some of this stuff and I'm like, what does this mean? And if I'm reading it, I'm saying, I gotta read this 2 or 3 times because I don't know what this is saying. I'm sure someone else who may not have to read legal books or they're in a different field, they're just like, what does this mean? And so I think it's always important. I know there's so many resources online, but I think it's really important for us to be able to explain this information in layman's terms. So the person who's just Googling information can read it and have a basic understanding. Because like you said, while other departments may have to really focus on it, everyone's going to need it, right? Like everyone should know a little bit about what a data breach is or a ransomware attack, because in addition to your company, your information may be involved in something, and you get this email and you see you've been involved in a data breach and you're like, what does that mean? And sometimes it can be really small where it's just like, the first two letters of your first name and first two letters of your last name and half your email were the only things that were taken. So you're like, okay, not a big deal. But other times it may be your credit card information, right? It could be some really important information, critical information involved in the breach, and you get the email or the notice and you're like, I don't even know what this means. So maybe it takes, I wouldn't say people like me, but maybe it takes someone who's willing to put this information in layman's terms so that just the everyday person can really read it and just have that basic understanding and feel comfortable, because our companies are dealing with information, but they're dealing with our information, right? Like New Balance is taking others' information, but then I'm giving my information to my gym or my church or whatever. So we're all part of this like data world. And some of us think about it more than others, but I think that would be like a perfect Demeka world, is like layman's terms. Everyone understands what's a data breach, data security, and how it may impact their everyday life.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I said once, it should be as easy as reading the paper, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the paper is written at a certain grade level that almost, my mother had us reading the paper when we were like little kids, right? So if you could read the paper, you should be able to read these notices, and they shouldn't be 80 pages, So I think they can be way shorter.
Yes, I totally agree, because I even get lost. I'm like, okay, let me just pray this works out because I don't know what this is saying. So I'm sure other people are looking at this, and you, like you said, once you get to page 20, 25, you're like, okay, well, let's just see what happens.
Yes, right. Exactly. Cross your fingers. Fingers. Well, this has been great having this conversation with you, and I'm so happy we were able to connect. And obviously, I'm looking forward to our other collaborations that we do in the future. So this is awesome. Thank you so much.
No, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk about data, and we're talking about it in layman's terms. So hopefully your listeners like, okay, I can get what they're saying, and they enjoy us talking in normal person talk.
Absolutely. I agree with that. All right, I'll talk to you soon.
Bye.